Hand off to Andy to talk the budget and the pro forma. And I suspect over the next several months, we'll probably have some discussions with the school board over what the pro forma should look like in the future, or should it be combined with the budget pamphlet or something like that. But bottom line, Andy will give you a real quick overview of that product, the level of detail that's in it. And for those of you in the room who are not yet on the school board, feel free to ask questions as they pop up. And you'll hand off to Melissa to talk about the annual financial review and the internal audits that we have going on. So next slide, please. So this is kind of our annual calendar. Unfortunately, I built it backwards, so we'll start at the bottom. The budget cycle, you can see the budget development really starts about the end of August, and that's because we have somewhat firm numbers for the enrollment in the district. And then the budget development goes all the way through March, really, when the assembly approves it after the school board. And then it really doesn't end until the state finally comes to whatever conclusion they're going to come to as to what our budget is for the following year. Last year and this current year that we're in, of course, the state had multiple extended sessions, so it didn't end on time. So Andy will talk through that, especially the little bit about the pro forma, because that's the piece that he puts a lot of work in that determines this is what we think our shortfall is, and this is what we think our max revenue is going to be for the year. He gives that to the board, and then they give us some guidance on actual budget development. On the top part, the internal audit cycle it occurs year-round, except for our auditor recently quit, and we're working to replace her as soon as possible. So those of you who knew Brenda, she was an amazing professional, but it was time for her to go to Texas. So Melissa will cover real briefly on audits, and then she'll go into the portions of the annual financial review, and then just a quick broad overview. So barring any questions, just for sake of time, Andy, if you can, next slide, please. Would you like to talk about the budget?
So my name is Andy Ratliff. I'm the Senior Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And I'm going to kind of go over the basic documents that we present to the board, what goes into preparing those, and really what they're used for, and kind of what our office does. So the first thing we do is, like as Jim said, we start our budget process towards the end of, in earnest, the end of August, early September, once we start getting in finalized numbers from last year, enrollment starts coming in, we start getting in all the new hires of teachers to see what our teacher costs are going to be. There's a lot of things that go into the planning of this. Generally, the pro forma, we deliver that to the school board in the first meeting in December, and then the second meeting in December. But really what the pro forma is designed to do is give us an overview of what our revenues are projected to be for next year. We take into account current state law, what our BSA is, any other changes in revenue that we might have, and then what our expenses are projected to be given our current budget that we adopted. So we take our current year's budgets and kind of roll them forward based on negotiated contract increases to other areas, utilities, pull that in, and really just kind of here's what, if we move all the expenditure projection, the level of service we have this year, if we move that to next year, what's it going to cost? And that really is what determines our budget gap that we go out front and say, here's how much money we need the budget gap that we need to close to be able to have a balanced budget to submit to the assembly. But really our first thing we do is our revenue assumptions. The biggest part of that is our enrollment projections. Our enrollment drives our state funding, which in turn produces what our maximum local contribution will be through property taxes. So that's a big thing that we really try to put a lot of accuracy into. We've hired an outside contractor, Northern Economics, to go through and help us with our enrollment projections so we can get the most accurate number we can for that, because really, you know, if you're off a percent on that, that's several $million. It becomes a lot of money really quick when you get off on your enrollment projections. So the current law of the BSA, impact aid, that's another one. We watch trends on base housing. Almost all the impact aid that we receive is based on the students that live on J-Bear. An impact aid, for those of you who don't know, it's a program by the federal government that when you have a military installation or other lands that are not generating tax revenue, the federal impact aid program gives you additional revenue to supplement that loss of taxable of land that can be taxed through the city. So all the land on J-Bear, you can't tax it through the city, so it's the federal impact aid is just designed to help assist school districts with education funding that way. And then investment income is another big cost driver that's been pretty unpredictable the last few years. We've invested with the municipality in their investment pool, and it's a mark-to-market, so it's invested in some high, low, medium risk investments. So what we go do monthly is mark that to the value, the current book value of those investments. But trying to project that out a year in advance. The last several years it's been pretty, it's been up and down. It's been a lot of changes in our investment markets. And then we have E-rate. That's another federal program where they reimburse us the cost of mostly internet services now. They're phasing out it's based on telecommunications. So they're phasing out our voice connection reimbursements and then putting more towards bandwidth. And then they sometimes have other special projects that will allow us to seek reimbursement through that program. And those we upgraded all the little boxes in the rooms of the schools, the wireless endpoint connections to get faster bandwidth in schools. But that was mostly federal or reimbursed through the E-rate program. So they do a lot for that occasionally. And then we have other revenues such as student activities, sports fees, parking fees, facility rentals, ROTC reimburses us some funds for instructors, Medicaid. There's a few other things like smaller items that go into our revenue projections. But those are the biggest things. So we create revenue projections. We take that to the school board since we have to have a balanced budget. We say here's our upper limit spending authority based on our known revenues or our assumed revenues for the next year. And that's where the basis of what we're going to balance to. So the pro forma really just kind of consolidates this down. Here's our working assumptions, get the school board to be aware of it, to be in agreement that these assumptions look correct or reasonable. And then we also go through our expenditures and roll those forward. The biggest thing is we're 90% people here. So any changes in our negotiated agreements with our bargaining groups, any change there can have a pretty big effect in the long term. So that's the biggest thing, step and lane movement that goes along with those contracts. Rents and utilities, we're constantly reviewing CPI increases and RCA filings that utilities put out. That's one of the biggest things is, when we had, I believe it was ML&P, they pretty suddenly gave us around 30% increase. It was really high. So that was unexpected. Things like that do come up. We try to project that as much as we can based on what they filed to date. And a lot of times we don't get that in time, but we try to make those adjustments as they come along. And then we have self-insurance as another high cost driver. So these are just kind of the cost drivers that the school board sees, and we try to put all these in a pro forma so the school board knows what's causing this budget gap, and they can go, when they go and talk to community members, here's what you guys can, here's the reason why your budget's going up. Because a lot of that question comes up whenever we talk about budget, why does it go up? And so the pro forma chart, we try to lay out why those increases are happening and to what amounts. We have the self-insurance. We're all self-insured for our workers' comp and liability insurance. Those costs can go up pretty quickly with a couple large claims. So we're trying to project out that, talking to our risk manager, seeing what's coming down in terms of legal settlements that maybe or cases they have open. So we're all constantly reviewing our insurance pool. And then we pay for stop loss too, so up to like $1.5 million we're self-insured, then after that a stop loss. But all the claims that we have, and large claims particularly, influence what our stop loss rates are. So we're reviewing that as well. And then we do our student transportation costs. That's another big driver that's changed here lately that's to some extent beyond our control of cost escalation. Is bus drivers are required to be paid at least 2 times the minimum wage. A couple of years ago, when the minimum wage, the voters increased the minimum wage by $1 one year, $1 the next, and then CPI after that. That increased many of our lowest paid drivers, $4 an hour over the course of those 2 years. So that really, that was really something that was, we could expect it, but it was just a huge cost driver that made our inflationary gap go up. And then now it's tied to inflation, so we're reviewing the CPI for Anchorage and see where that goes, because that's what it's tied, the minimum wage is now tied to. So as the minimum wage goes up, so does our driver's wages. And then fuel prices and depreciation of our equipment are the other kind of bigger drivers that we always review, and really kind of could influence us one way or the other with market changes. So that's really the pro forma. It's really just our revenue estimates and our cost estimates and what is that gap, and then have write up what those changes are, so hopefully the board can go out and explain to folks whenever they're asked. That's the general purpose of that. And then while we're producing the pro forma, we're having schools and departments, they're putting in their requests for what they need to operate for the next year. So as we're developing your current level of service, the cost to provide that next year, they're also developing the changes they need to make their programs more efficient and more effective. So as they do that, we start compiling that in November and December, and then talking to the community and the principals, and just kind of get a feel for what their priorities are. So after the pro forma, we go through and we're starting. We put together all the district initiatives through what the departments have submitted, what Dr. Bishop, her plans for us are. We all roll that into a preliminary budget that has reduced out that budget gap. And I guess I should say we don't have to have a budget gap. I mean, I guess there's a scenario in the future if they ever produce some sort of forward funding where we knew we were getting increases. There's potential where we didn't have a budget gap, but however unlikely. So the preliminary budget is our first draft of the budget that we're going to take to the school board with all the district's initiatives are prioritized and balanced to what our revenue forecast is. And we forecast out what we think we're going to receive in grants, add some contingency in for in case we receive legislative grants for capital projects, food service, transportation, and then student activities. So we roll those all into one upper limit spending authority that we take to the assembly after the school board's approved it, that we have to be under in total. So they have a total amount that we can spend up to. If we go over that, we have to go back to the assembly and request more authority. And generally we do that, it's if we get some unforeseen revenue from the state or from grants or something. I've only had a couple of cases where we've done that while I've been here. So it's fairly rare that we actually have to do that, but that's something we always consider and we're always watching as we're projecting out our expenses to make sure we're under that municipal cap. So our preliminary budget, it takes into account the school board, the goals, the guidance, our initiatives, and then community engagement. And then we will update our revenue projections. We get more information known about enrollment or on-base housing, things that are going to influence. We want to get that as correct as we can, and then we'll discuss that as we present the budget. So once the school board gets a budget, beginning of February, they have 2 readings of it. Once the school board approves it, it goes to the assembly so they can create it then becomes the proposed budget that we take to the assembly. They have 2 readings of it. Take that the first Monday in March, it has to be there. So they'll vote on it twice, or read it once, vote on it the second time, and then it becomes our adopted budget. We don't produce an adopted budget until after the legislative session is ended. Generally, we just wait until they decide where our budget's going to be. We spend a lot of time from the months of January when they first get there through June, generally, for the last few years, just analyzing what bills are coming down. So there's a lot of reading legislation and seeing what the effect for Anchorage is going to be.
So I think this year we ought to just pass the budget and then tell the legislature this is our budget funded.
Good luck with that. Andy, could you clarify, when our proposed budget goes to the assembly, they only have authority to determine the upper limit. They can't go back and decide on we don't want you to spend this. They don't have that authority. That's the board's authority. but they have just the upper limit authority. That doesn't mean they haven't tried, but that's.
Correct. Yeah, they can't adjust any of the line items on there. They could adjust the total amount down. I guess they could do it up, but I don't see why they would if we're not getting the revenue. But if they were to say, we don't want to pay this amount of local taxes, I think they can go ahead and drop the upper limit down. We've been really fortunate to have an assembly that's been really supportive of us, frankly. And they've taxed to the cap for many years now.
So I'm just curious about the enrollment piece, because that's so critical. I know you guys used to have your own demographer and you don't anymore. Has that made it less accurate? And do you tend to try to be really conservative and underestimate the enrollment that you're going to have so that you don't get caught short? I mean, that seems like a really big piece to juggle.
I mean, really, we want to get it as accurate as possible because that enrollment's going to go for our teacher allocations. If we go in and try to underestimate it and don't have enough teachers hired and have these large classrooms, that's not good either. So we're trying to get it as accurate as possible. I believe the demographer, we are, kind of tossing around the idea to see what would be available on that, because having an in-house demographer would be very beneficial for our capital projects and for our demographic projections as a whole. But they went back, and the demographers we're using now, they went back for several years and applied their method to what actually happened. And their method of predicting our enrollment was like quite a bit more accurate than what it had been in the past. I think it's because they have they have access to new data like the PFDs, the applications there. They're pulling that information into our demographic projections where they can see where the students live now too. So they're doing it school by school more accurately as well as overall with that data, because they can really tell where people live when they do that.
And another side note is in the past, that was a shared service between the municipality and the ASD. We shared a demographers
And that person's gone, right?
from both
They don't have
entities.
Yeah, neither one of us have a demographer.
Yeah,
this
they've
way.
been more accurate with the outside company though,
Okay.
prior to that.
Yeah, but not saying, it
Right.
I'm sure it
They
depends
just
so
have
much on
more
who you
data.
get in rather than whether it works for you, they work for you or not.
You mentioned tax to the cap. You really mean they tax to what they can legally contribute to the district?
Right, to the state cap.
Right.
So there was,
So
that
that-
changed several years ago where we were
Not the
capped it to
city
the
tax.
municipal. There's a municipal and a state amount that we can receive up to a max. For years, we were taxing up to the local contribution that the municipal charter would allow. And then the state changed their funding mechanism where we would tax up to a state cap and the munis was actually higher. So we have to take the lesser of the two.
Could you explain to the
Actually,
guests?
the state was actually at the Anchorage. The Anchorage was established at the state's, the funding formula for mills. And Lyda Green, a senator from the Valley, about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, was able to move through the finance. You probably know, Matt's who benefited by having I think it's 2.65, yeah, cap, because it was growing so fast that I don't know how they articulated that the growth wasn't actualized by the taxes, so then they created this 2.65, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, it became a discussion about, hey, districts came and said, hey, what's that side deal that this one district has? Cities did, not districts, because it behooved districts, right? So cities started talking, and it was actually a bill by Stoltz, who, to make everyone happy, he lowered everyone else's, and it was when Dan Sullivan, I believe, was in. And you remember them, Anchorage, saying they have an additional $6 million. That wasn't because it wasn't needed, it was that they had, the 4 mills was everyone's. And then to fix it, because there was this slight little right in a bill that she had done for her own district, what they did was move everyone down to where they were instead of moving this one up. And so then when everyone went down, it didn't benefit school districts, it benefited municipalities and boroughs that pay money towards it. So that, so the state was at 4 for everyone.
I think they might have given us a little bit of money outside that year to make everyone happy.
I just wanted to disclaim, that was right after I left.
And
We would never have let that happen.
there's a point here that I think people need to understand too, is even if our municipal, our assembly, our citizens wanted to donate more, give more, we're not allowed. And that has to do with equity across the state. And this has been litigated on a national level in many states. So people have said, why can't local citizens just pay more for schools if they want more? We're not allowed.
Well, and that is pursuant to U.S. Supreme Court decisions that require equality in education funding. Some standards, so you don't have really rich neighborhoods having excellent schools and poor neighborhoods having bad schools.
In theory.
In theory, yeah. But it's driven by federal law. Yeah.
So after the, like I said, we spent a lot of time reviewing those statutes as they come up and trying to figure out what they mean for us. This year, they didn't really get to anything other than flat funding, which is a blessing for us. Particularly how late in the game they actually decided to do it. So we were happy to get just flat funding. And then, so after they make the final decision, we'll produce our adopted budget. If their decision changes funding, then we'll take that back to the board to revise it once more before we produce an adopted budget. But in the case of this year, it's going to look exactly like the proposed budget.
Can I rephrase that? I wouldn't say we're happy to get flat funding. We're relieved that flat funding was the only cut as opposed to 3 times that amount.
Given the choices. That's really all I have on the budget. If you have any more questions, happy to answer them.
One more question. It feels like one thing that maybe should be added in here is the dates for when, you have to make decisions on staffing. Like at what point because you have this thing that says, state legislative budget analysis, but there's nothing in there that shows, here's the point at which teachers have to be cut if we need to cut them. Just so people really, like if outsiders looked at this, it would be good for them to really understand that.
Yeah, we can certainly put that in and put in, because the other union contracts have different union contracts have different, periods of when you have to notify them of layoff.
And maybe
So
it's
it's
just
not
a separate chart that shows,
Teachers are in statute, but our other classified groups are not. So, but those are all dictated by our negotiated bargaining agreements. We can certainly include that.
Hi, I'm Melissa Myers. I'm the Senior Director of Finance. Next slide, please. So this is intended to be a very broad overview of the CAFR. And
Next slide.
I think that was good.
No, that was his.
Okay, it was not my calendar.
You're good.
All right. So we have a lot of board members here. So most of them already sort of know the rough, broad outline of how the CAFR gets pulled together. So we'll just go through the broad outline. If you have more questions, we can go into more detail. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Review, which we all call the CAFR, is our annual financial report. There's actually 2 reports that we submit. One follows the state guidelines and one follows other guidelines for ASBO and other agencies that we work with to get certificates of excellence and awards. But, sorry, are you sure? I had
You can go, if you go down one more slide. No, you thought the calendar was
was there a
first.
calendar?
Calendar was
sorry.
second.
Okay,
That's
so
good.
just to give you an overview of our CAFR, how it comes together. To start with, we start July 1, which is the beginning of our fiscal year. Our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. And we start literally the first week of July, starting to prepare to close all of our funds. And this goes into, which most of you probably realize, but closing all of your revenues and expenses, making sure that all your revenues and expenses that might occur in July through payments, through credit cards transactions, things that need to be reflected in the prior year, so June 30th. So for the first, basically all of July, our whole accounting department works on making sure all of the revenues and expenditures are in the correct period. And that takes quite a bit of time. The schools are also closing out, schools leave, and so it's really a time-consuming kind of energy that has to go into that. We also in July have grant reimbursements, which is also very time-consuming as well. We had roughly $44 million in grant revenue last year, so the amount of grant reimbursements that we have to do for state and federal both take a lot of time, and that happens all through July and all through August. at the same time that we're trying to close out our funds. But it's important because we need that revenue accounted for in June 30th period. So our CAFR period basically runs from July 1 and should be completed by November 15th. The state requires it by November 15th. And we try to get to the board by the first week of July, or first week in November. So the last few years it's been delayed. Some things due to the state not giving us the information we need. Some things due to delays internally with our software or just new staffing, different things like that. So we are on task this year, and the goal is to get the CAFR completed to the board by first week of November. So that's just a rough overview of timing. And as Jim mentioned, we have internal audits. They go out throughout the year. The internal audits are very different from an external audit. Internal audit is our CAFR audit from our external auditor, BDO. Internal audits, as Jim mentioned, we have Brenda that left. She works for the city, but the state or the district funds her position. And these are internal audits like that review our purchase card program, our credit card program, our student activities, just basically anything that the board deems necessary or that the CFO department feels that we need to look further into if we have concerns. So we're not really going to go into that much more. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's actually the
I'm
previous
going to go back two
slide.
slides. Right. Thank you. So just to give you an overview of our CAFR. The school district is a government agency, so we comply with GASB and it is considered public accounting. There's very big differences between public accounting and private accounting. And so kind of the basis for the difference is that the private sector, they focus on the bottom line for profit. They focus on the owners, they have a vested interest in the profit that they're getting from the company. And so the public entity, government accounting, which the school district follows, they're set by policy. So it's not looking for necessarily the profit out of an organization because we don't have profit. So it's just very different in how they're structured. Basically, it's based on the perspective of the end user. And the end user for government accounting is the public. So the reason, So the reason we do two different financial statements, which I mentioned earlier, is a lot of organizations do this, public organizations. Basically, the annual financial report, it conforms to state guidelines, and it's basically a different presentation of how the financials are recorded, and the district has it currently called the ASD supplemental. So it's just a much kind of condensed set of information, just kind of presented differently to conform with the state. And different states have different guidelines that they conform to. So, and the reason the school district does do different reports right now, we do the CAFR, is because there's a lot of other organizations that we deem basically they need this presentation to I don't know how to say that. Basically that like the ASVO and others. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, there's other organizations that similar chart of accounts that we use to do the CAFR. The state supplemental is based on the state chart of accounts that they require us to do. As we get more comparable and want to compare more with in-state, we need to switch over to the state chart of accounts to be able to really be compare for our region more than on a national standard.
Right. So, next slide, please. Thank you. So just to give you a broad overview of our CAFR. The CAFR is broken out into 3 sections. Basically, it starts out with, you have your government-wide financials, and those are intended to provide a broad overview that's similar to the private sector business. And then you basically have all of your notes, which are your footnotes, and they have to comply with your GASB regulations and what they require. And then, of course, you have all your financial statements broken out by funds and your statistical section at the end. Your government funds are broken out by basically your government funds and your non-governmental funds. And within your government funds, you have major funds and non-major funds. So we currently have 4 major funds. Just general fund, our special revenue grants fund, capital project fund, and our debt service fund. And our non-major funds are basically food service, student activities, and pupil transportation. And the difference between the major funds and the non-major funds are basically the non-major funds can be consolidated all in one column and reflected that way on your financials. And they're just identified as separate funds with less audit requirements associated. And your major funds are basically funds that your government officials believe that the funds are particularly noteworthy to your users, your public. So your non-governmental funds, or otherwise known as proprietary funds, these are funds like your health insurance fund or self-insurance, compensated absences fund that accounts for your employees' earned and used leave, equipment replacement fund that basically accounts for your financing of equipment and vehicles. And these funds are basically used to provide kind of financing of goods and services for to other departments on a cost reimbursement basis. So that's it. Next slide. I think that's, yeah. So I know it was very, very broad, but we're kind of intending for non-board members and not many board members to be here. So
It's okay, I can close, barring any questions.
How does the state's bond rating or credit rating affect ours?
Indirectly, of course, it naturally would affect ours, but right now, the muni's still a AAA because all our bonds are through the municipality. You know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, the state made a last-ditch effort, didn't go quite far enough in coming up with a long-term solution for budgeting, so I don't see them going back. I think they're 3A minus right now, or, I mean, I know they've dropped one, but they're not quite like Illinois at junk on status yet. But right now, it hasn't really affected the immunity yet.
I just want to add, one of the reasons the board scrutinizes closely the CAFRs because we've received certificates of excellence for many years, and that impacts public confidence, the bonding, the whole piece. So it's one of the reasons we do focus on it.
I think if you want to, especially for those who may very well be future school board members and obviously those who are school board members, if there's a takeaway from the budget is Andy spends a lot of effort trying to find out how much money do we need to function the way we're set up currently, and how much do we think we're getting from the state and the city. The part that's changing, and it's really started about a year ago, and it'll continue changing over the next couple of years, is trying to figure out, now that we know how much money we have, what are the real priorities that are going to make a difference in education. And so you think that budget is just a numbers game, but it's not. I mean, we invest the resources we have in the priorities that are going to make a difference in the schools. So, you know, it is, sometimes a lot of people I think get confused and they say, oh, well, CFO office does budget. Everyone in the district, all of the leaders, Mark, Dr. Bishop, Mike, everyone in the room, to include the school board, is looking at all of these programs and initiatives that we're trying to get going, finding it, looking at data to figure out what works, what doesn't work, where do we need to invest. And so a huge part of the budget is Andy figuring out how much we're going to get, how much if we did everything the way we did it last year. But the academic side is starting to push us towards not assuming we're going to do anything necessarily the way we did it last year. But this is what we need to change next year. And so budget is a living, breathing document as it's built, and there's a lot of people who invest their priorities and time into coming up with ultimately a budget that meets the school board guidance. So when Andy does the pro forma, and he'll come up and we'll brief the school board, and it's 30-something pages long, and then we'll sit down and explain any of the data points. But really what we're trying to get from the school board, the community during our listening sessions, is to find out what's important. So I'm going to go back into the dark rooms behind the green curtain and the wizard, and we start crunching numbers that really what we come out with doesn't surprise anybody. mean, ultimately, a budget that surprises people is the wrong budget.
And moving into the future, we're finding it used to be, let's have this listening place at this school at this, and that's really not how people are accustomed to giving input now with smartphones and crowdsourcing. So we're trying to find manners in which we can get the most information from our community to work with that, then to present the board the best information for the board to make decisions about ASD and what the community is looking for. So we're looking at innovative ways to be able to reach out to more people, because going to a gym is good for some people, you know, and sit and listen to a presentation, but the feedback that we've received is that that's not a place that most people want to go. They want to be able to give their input in another form, and so we're working on those ways to be able to reach the public.
That's a good point, because we have 5,700, I think, people who responded to a survey. Went to Eagle River High, and there was 27 ASD employees and 3 students trying to get their government credit for that night. And so, I mean, it was great, actually.
We're just going to work smarter, yeah.
We put all the chairs in a circle and had a great time talking to the students, the 3 that showed up. But the televised, I know it sounds like but it's true. And the hundreds of hours we put making posters to go around the room, they were really cool, but the 3 kids really wanted to talk. And then here it was pretty much, it's the same kind of thing, but so we're trying to look at a better way to reach the community, because they're not coming here, I mean, some people in between their first and second job of the day to come in for the town hall. So, but really the school board plays a big role, because if we're not asking the school board what their priorities are and kind of telling the school board these are the things we're looking at, working on, and this is the direction we're headed, the worst thing we could do is surprise the school board with a budget that they have no idea why we put this kind of money on these 3 things, and that is not what they've been talking about. So it is the Dr. Stocks and Dr. Bishops and Mikes and all of the academic people, but the school board plays a huge role, and that role is the guidance for budget development. And you know, in the past, a couple years ago, where maybe the school board wasn't brought in early enough, the guidance would come later in the game. But I think it's definitely important for us to ask and receive and talk and work with to figure out what is it, Member Marcette, do you want to see in the budget this year? You know, as we're talking, because that way when you see the budget and it comes out, you're not surprised, and that would be a failure on my part and several other people. And so then we get through the budget, and the CAFR in this room, Kathleen, I mean, she has hers tabbed, highlighted. She's like the compendium of knowledge on what we actually spend our money on. So really, it's true.
It's a little wrinkled because it's under her pillow every night too.
It's like, oh, but so yeah, we can't pull anything off her. But really, the CAFR is, I mean, you have the budget, which is really just a plan. And then all day, every day, Andy is trying to figure out all these good idea fairies coming through, saying, okay, I got to keep us on track. But it's really, the CAFR is the accounting of, we had a plan, what did we actually execute? How did we actually get through the year, and how did we come out? And when she talked about government accounting, they have a government accounting standards board, and so you've got this centralized pool of really smart accountants. And as Andy described to me, you know, accounting is more how you legally put money in little slots to make sure everything is the right color of money and in the right place and all the zeros add up. It's definitely more than math. It's very technical. It's very time consuming. It's very attention to detail, and that's why the CAFR, to my knowledge, we're the only school district in the state that actually does the CAFR by themselves. Matsu pays BDO to actually build the bulk of the CAFR for them. It would cost a lot of money for us to do that. We'd probably get it, I don't even know if it would be done any earlier. It would be very expensive. But it is the document that at the end of the day, you know, it really says that Melissa's folks did they do their job right and account for the money? And then it balances against, how did that match against what Andy thought the budget should be? So that's why those two documents, if you're a school board member or me, need to be able to compare those two, compare last year's budget, the end of year CAFR, and it's a report card as to how well we did based off how well we planned. So that's kind of,
Where you said the assembly only looks at the top level, but the board members look at line items. Do you guys have an amount where you're like, budget was the plan, it looks like we're going more than 10% over that plan? Do you have a certain amount where you have to check back in with the board?
we have quarterly financial reports. We're working towards monthly financial reports. I think we have a monthly finance meeting with the school board almost every month. At the end of every month, we give a funds projection through the end of the year. We started in December last year and said, we think we're going to be 9.52 something percent at the end of the year. We think we ended up somewhere around 9.48. So I think we try to keep them informed every single month as to where we stand towards reaching the end. As we get better at providing monthly financials, and we'll work with the school board, because really this report is for them. What are those things you want to see every month? And it might be that we pick a hot topic and say, let's just do a deep dive on this one thing, but then we're still going to show you the health of the district at the end of this month. The one piece that's never always right is we do accrual based. So it's like if you were at home and your rent is due on 15 July, but you paid it in August, it still would go against your July expenses if you tried to budget every month. Well, we do that. So we get bills that are 2 and 3 months old sometimes, or we get it early and we might pay it in June when it's really a July bill. So for a district this big with over 100 facilities, there's a lot of bills that are outside that 4-week window that you have to account for. So a monthly financial is a snapshot. It's like as of today.
In just reference, maybe when you asked the question, my brain went in a different area than a financial person. The board does direct, if your question was, if the assembly is a higher level and the board has the actual line item, yes, the board can say, we want to spend more money on teachers and less money on this. Absolutely. And that's their job in building. When we bring back to them, so in regard to just the daily finances or the weekly, the overall budget is a design where the board is the ultimate decision maker.
And then
You
throughout
guys do
board
like mid-course corrections, not just like beginning of the
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, we have to bring the budget.
Oh, we
back.
decided
well,
to close Mount Eliana in January.
Yeah.
Throughout the
Had not
year
been
too, we
planned.
do our, if something's gonna cost $200,000 or more, that's outside of our spending plan that the board approved, then that has to go to the board also. So that's kind of the upper limit threshold that we had, if we say, hey, this is a great idea, we need to fund this, or if it's an emergency, we need to fund this, it still needs to go through the board.
Thank you.
Another big thing is the numbers that come in. We projected numbers, to your point, Dina. We projected them. If they don't come in, that means the revenue didn't come in, which means we have to bring it right
Yeah.
back to them this year. Yeah.
Another thing to keep in mind is, just because the assembly approves the budget, hopefully in March, and not again later on, doesn't mean that when we meet quarterly, that we aren't going to do an update if there was something significant. And along with when the financials are out there, it's open for the whole public to see as well. So we are, while the assembly may not do anything adjudication-wise with, it doesn't mean that the assembly and the public don't see those numbers as well.
Are there any other questions?
I want to say thank you. You guys did a fine job. I like it. You made finances seem so interesting.
Well, I was trying to find the Young Frankenstein video clip on putting on the Ritz, but none of my guys had ever seen the movie.
Oh, you're feeding the stereotype, you're feeding the stereotype.
But you didn't know what I was talking about.
So, 5-minute break? Yeah. Well, 5-minute break?
Okay, I got that started and then we'll see what's
She is taking like 4 days. It's all
Do you want this to be the, so this will be the introduction to associations table? No, that's, please, sorry. I'm the other one. Community groups? Yeah. This is during speed dating.
breathe. I'm gonna over there, and then I gave Jim.
Glad you made it, Matt.
So I guess we're going to be over at this table. Our goal is attention.
Oh, yeah, and actually, FY. Because I she would have known there was a lot more work, so they would have been into a lot more detail for things. We thought there would be a lot more. I mean, we didn't, I don't think we realized it was for school. That there'd be a lot more. We didn't really go into I thought I saw a link for people. And did you think of it as a I mean, I thought everyone thought of it as as far as how we when I said it, so you know that word. Like a map. Maybe we should come up with some other acronyms. All right, annual financial how to rocketry that mean? Maybe we could call it our annual financial
weather's not been nice, I've been taking the leaves and going to cabin. We went back to this cabin a couple times last spring.
And you're saying that correct? Just cautious.
My husband did.
Annual financial you know, did you realize that Red Steel is 1 to 1 year, so something counting is very different from private system, right? It's interesting the differences, but you know, I did not realize that many districts in the state, they have the two. It's very unfortunate. So like we had to come, but they were very really good institutes. Really one is good for the state. So it's really to try to merge into one financial. You know, we're kind of looking at the benefits of the we actually are talking to South this week on that too. After I said that word,
Because I started like as soon as
I'm sorry.
When did you move out? Yeah, retraining myself here. Windermere.
So, we're gonna move to P card reservation. That's your cue.
I moved back in '01.
Oh, it is? Oh, God, bite my tongue. So this is PJD now.
My folks are over there.
Oh, yeah.
So you got,
I really like it.
moving to speed dating again, so board members who are doing some presentation, please get out of your appropriate.
Are you talking about me?
The housing stuff.